You may have heard of the term the Akashic records, and this idea or concept comes from the Sanskrit word Akasha. This is an ancient word that has shown up in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It was later adopted by various occult theosophists and religious and spiritual figures throughout time and is commonly used in New Age communities today. But what is the Akashic record or the Akashic records? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome back to Shak's Talks. I'm Shakti. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get right into it. Akashic comes from the root kash, which means to be. Akasha is an independent, all-pervading, and eternal substance, essential to the structure of the universe. It can be thought of as ether, an ethereal fluid that permeates all, or a mental concept for the basis of all reality, the first element. Helena Blavatsky was a Russian and American mystic and author who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875, and she interpreted Akasha as a sort of life force and also called it indestructible tablets of the astral light, recording both the past and the future of human thought and action. I've talked about this book before. I'm going to show you 3 different books by yogis, and we've talked about all of them on Shak's Talks, but Thought Power by Swami Shivananda, The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali by Satchidananda, and Kundalini Tantra by Satyananda Saraswati. And just for your background information, these yogis are all part of the same lineage. So Shivananda is the master. These are 2 of the yogis that came through his lineage. And the way that they operate is they all basically take the teachings and interpret them and continue to pass them along in their own way. So it's like, it's kind of like a plant who has like starter babies, like a spider plant. And then the little spider breaks off the main plant and then you pot that and it grows its own prolific spider plant and so on and so forth. And I am actually also a part of this lineage because I grew up on Swami Satchidananda's ashram and he bestowed all of his teachings upon me and my community and gave us mantra initiation and all kinds of practices. So just some interesting backstory. That's why I'm always referring to these yogis, because that's kind of the basis for my own deep internal understanding of these esoteric concepts. And it started before birth for me. So in Thought Power by Swami Shivananda, which was first published in 1962, there is a little section on Akasha. And one of the things he says is you can move the world through thought force. Thought has great power. It can be transmitted from one man to another man. The powerful thoughts of great sages and rishis of yore are still recorded in the Akasha, Akashic records. Yoginis who have clairvoyant vision can perceive those thought images. They can read them. You are surrounded by an ocean of thought. You are floating in the ocean of thought. So that's Shivananda. Then one of his disciples and a teacher, Swami Satchidananda, the one that I grew up learning from, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which was first published in 1978, he defines Akasha as ether in that book. And then in Kundalini Tantra, which was published in 1984, Satyananda Saraswati defines Akasha as ethereal space. But there's more of a nuance here and a distinction. He breaks it down into 3 different kinds of Akasha, which I find very interesting. The inner space before the forehead, which I think of as like the third eye chakra, is known as Chid Akasha. The heart space is known as Hridayakasha. And the ether of outer space is known as Mahakasha. So it's interesting to think of this all permeating substance or basis for reality through these various centers of perception in the yogic body. And then I'm thinking about all of this because of the telepathy tapes by Kai Dickens that we've all been talking about lately, and also an Akashic Records workshop that I've been taking. And so I kind of wanted to tie in these concepts with the thoughts that are swirling around about telepathy and other psi abilities, psionics, and then of course we're going to bring it back to aliens because that's one of my favorite things to think about and study on this channel. So we're going to jump around a bit and then we're going to tie it all together, and then we're going to do a little exercise with our journals. So make sure that today you have a journal and a pen. So if you haven't already checked out the Telepathy Tapes podcast, of course I highly recommend it. It's linked below, and I've talked about it in a couple other episodes here on Shocks Talks. And I want to bring up this section where... Okay, so recently, Kai Dickens, who is the creator of this podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, was working with Diane Hennessy Powell, who is the doctor who has been studying the nonverbal autistics for a very long time and has already written books and done experiments and is now getting a lot of recognition because of Kai's work. So they've both been doing the circuits of podcasts lately and doing all kinds of interviews with all kinds of different people. And it's been really fun to kind of listen to all of those and get a little more deeper information about their process, what they each went through in their careers, and how this work is impacting them now, and then the work that they're planning to continue in terms of more experimentation and more sharing of this, what this community is tapped into, this community of families and teachers and friends of these nonverbal autistic folks who have really interesting psi abilities, including telepathy, but not limited to. So recently Kai was on Joe Rogan, and when asked about how these telepathic spellers get information, Kai explains that some of the kids seem to see through someone else's eyes or hear through their ears, while some seem to have merged consciousness with someone else. In one experiment where the mom was looking at an image, she thought it was a food fight when she saw the picture with ketchup and mustard, but her kid interpreted it as paint. So she's not sending a thought, she's perceiving something herself, and then the telepathic kid who is connected to her is grabbing the impression of her perception and then reinterpreting it and getting a new answer in a way. It was like a slight variation on what the data was. And this is very common in remote viewing, which is why protocols are created in such a strict way to minimize the amount of psychic overlay or interpretation that can occur when data is being passed from one source to another. So this is all going to tie back into this idea of the Akashic record and how people can tap right into the database of reality itself to gather useful information. I also wanted to bring back up this quote from episode 3 that I talked about in another Shocks Talks, but it's from the kid Houston, and he said, "I'm special, I can hear thoughts." And his mom, this is when his mom first found out that he was telepathic, and she's going like, "Bullshit, like, are you telling the truth?" And he said, "You don't get the kind of gifts that I have if you lie." So the reason I wanted to bring this quote back in again is because I want to tie it into moral purity from chapter 5 of Thought Power. So this chapter is titled Acquisition of Thought Power by Moral Purity. And Shivananda writes, "A man who speaks the truth and has moral purity has always powerful thoughts. One who has controlled anger by long practice has tremendous thought power. If a yogi whose thought is very powerful speaks one word, it will produce tremendous impressions on the minds of others. Virtues like truthfulness, earnestness, and industry are the best sources of mental power. Purity leads to wisdom and immortality. Purity is of two kinds, internal or mental, and external or physical. Mental purity is more important. He also says physical purity is also needed. Of course, this is part of yogic philosophy. But I find it interesting because, of course, these nonverbal autistic folks are very limited physically in all kinds of ways and have to live with great struggles, but mentally they are completely free. They're free to access data from the database of reality. They can hear people's thoughts. They can connect with each other in virtual spaces that they refer to as the hill. And all of this is really expanded upon in the Telepathy Tapes podcast. If you haven't heard it already, I recommend going and listening to all of that. It's absolutely beautiful and mind-blowing. But I'm just kind of glossing over it right now because I'm thinking about the ways in which people throughout history have developed understandings of these Akashic records or their own abilities to access data from the database. And sometimes whole systems have been built up around what an individual has learned through their own experience. So, for example, yoga, philosophy, and practices developed as a result of individuals who meditated and started to access this information from reality itself. And then they would write it down or pass it along verbally or create systems to help other people to gain access to these greater powers and abilities in our limited physical matter reality that we are primarily focused within. So another one of those people in modern day is Tom Campbell, who I also talk about a lot on this channel. And just for those who aren't familiar with him, he is a studier of the out-of-body experience and was a former NASA astrophysicist who ended up getting deep into consciousness studies for about 30 years and then wrote A Theory of Everything. And I love his theory of everything, and so that's why I always refer to it. And he has also been making the rounds on various podcasts, and I just think that with all the conversation happening in the Psi communities or the UFO and UAP communities or followers of the telepathy tapes, there is this kind of what's the word? There's a intersection of all of these different psi phenomena, and in order to navigate and understand what these things really imply, it's helpful to have a theory to ground into. So I like to ground into Tom Campbell's theory because all of these things can be explained and understood through the lens of his theory. So I linked one video below where he talks about the Akashic records, and he likes to create new modern metaphors to describe these concepts. So he calls it the database, and he describes why these databases exist. He said in Hinduism and Buddhism, where they called it the Akashic records, these folks knew that there was a database because they collected data from these databases. He says remote viewers are collecting data from these databases. Seeing auras is a kind of data. Intuition can be a kind of data. And where is all of this information coming from? Where is it coming from, and why does it exist? He says information comes from a library, an information source, a database in a generic sense, and it has to be there in our reality system in order for our reality to be rendered. So in his theory, he is basically saying that this Akashic record, or this system of information that is all-pervasive and eternal, it exists in order for reality to render the next thing that has not yet been measured. Now, this is getting into the nature of reality, and as he sees it, things are being rendered for consciousness as it is experiencing it. So he gives the example of going up into a grandmother's attic, and maybe the grandmother just passed away. and nobody has been in that attic maybe ever in their life, like these family members that are coming to clean out all her belongings. So they're going up in there to see what's in there. Nobody's ever seen what's in there, so the system of reality is about to render for them this experience of what's in the attic. And of course, that's going to be based on actual reality that did occur in this grandmother's life. So the things that she placed there are all recorded in this system, in this database. And the system is, instead of just sticking to exactly what everyone, what happened in reality, it's actually, in his theory, he's asserting that it is drawing a probability from a distribution. So what does that mean? It means that there are things that are likely to be there, and they each have different probabilities attached to them. And at the moment that that space is being rendered for the person that's going into it, a random draw is taken from that spread of probabilities, and that is what is rendered. So why would there be any wiggle room here? What things might have like a very low probability? Perhaps it's a special kind of spider that is probable in this area, but is not super likely. And for whatever reason, the system grabs a random draw and the spider is rendered. So when the kids go up to look through the stuff, they're looking at all these boxes, but they also happen to see this one special spider that is not that common, because in this instance, a low probability thing happened to be drawn from the random draw, and it was also rendered with all the other high probability things like boxes and grandma's paintings because she was a painter, and her doily collection or whatever else is in there. So he also uses the example of like a refrigerator door, and how you're not going to just open a fridge and see a black hole, because the system is going to put something there for you. And what it's going to put there is whatever you grocery shopped for and the shelves that live in that particular refrigerator. But in his theory, it's not necessarily rendering things that aren't being perceived, which is very interesting, and something that I think we're going to hear more about in the very near future as people continue to have these conversations about the nature of reality and consciousness. I actually heard, I can't remember if it was Kai Dickens or if it was Diane Hennessy Powell. One of them on a recent interview was saying that, like, in a weird way, maybe even the flat earthers aren't going to be thought of as so crazy after we really get deep into the understanding of reality, because what we'll find is that reality is being rendered and it's not necessarily entirely fixed. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, I don't want you to think that that means that, like, oh, maybe the earth is flat, because there are rule sets in physical matter reality that do determine the nature of things in physical matter reality. So the earth is round because of gravity and the movements around the sun, and all the planets are round, and all of that is part of the system of information that makes up our reality. But I think what people are suggesting is just that it's not as solid as some people tend to believe in the materialist worldview. It's a little more ephemeral, because it is just information that is being rendered for our experience. So in this Tom Campbell video and in his example, he does say that our system is probabilistic, not deterministic. So in order for it to make these renders on the fly for all of us who are experiencing life, this database has to exist so that it has the right information to pull from. So think about it. Let's go back to the attic example and say that, like, people are going to go in that attic and look through all these boxes and find all these things from grandma's life. And those things have to be rendered based on the truth of the life that she lived. So that information is being stored in this database. And it's not like, according to this theory, it's not that all of that stuff is constantly existing for everyone all the time. It's existing as needed. This is a thing that I do find hard to grasp sometimes, and I don't know if I believe in it or not, but I think it's interesting, which is why I'm sharing it. This possibility that perhaps things are, um, data is real and it does exist, but we as consciousness in these forms are experiencing that data in our own special way. We're interpreting that data through our senses primarily, and then through our extra senses if we happen to have those up and running. You know what I mean? So, another part of this topic that has been coming up in these interviews lately is this idea that, of course, consciousness is fundamental and that our thoughts exist outside of us, not inside of us. They're kind of like beyond us, and that our sensory perception is also beyond our physical form. It extends far beyond. Our consciousness is able to spread out as far as reality can go, and it also can be focused in this little experience packet, which is our body, mind, and soul. And the nonverbal autistic folks are less focused in their physical body because their physical body is limited in so many ways and difficult to exist within. And they talk about things like wearing heavy boots or heavy jewelry to help hold them in their body or help them to feel their body. They often need physical touch or support from the people in their lives to bring them into their physical form and help them feel the boundaries of their bodies. And that's why they're so good at these psi abilities, because it's more natural for them to be flowing outside of their physical body. And that's why they're picking up on so much data from the data stream outside of their physical senses. Whereas normal, healthy, able-bodied, mentally able humans, quote unquote normal, because really what is normal? And there's really not that many of us that are completely inside of that category, but for the sake of the example, people who are very primarily focused in their physical bodies might have a harder time accessing the senses outside of them unless they apply these various techniques and protocols to help develop that extrasensory perception or ability. And that's why meditation exists, because that's one of the tools and gateways into expanding awareness. And I would also add imagination is a great tool, and it is one of the keys of accessing these abilities that go beyond our typical physical confined sense of reality. So imagination is a way to take the consciousness and start to extend it out beyond the physical senses. Imagination or visualization or basically mental focus. And in meditation, one of the foundational practices is simply to quiet and clear the mind, but there's a lot more that can happen beyond just quieting the mind. And so I wanted to kind of talk about imagination a little bit and then bring it back into how we can use our imagination to help access the Akashic records. So starting with just imagination as a tool, we all know that imagination is foundational to getting anything created in reality. Even getting out of bed in the morning, you might not perceive that a thought is happening that is initiating your body's ability to get itself up and out of bed. But if you were really quiet and paying attention to your inner world as you went about your morning, and let's just say you have the luxury of living in a quiet space without other people around to distract you, and you start to pay attention to what's going on just before these physical actions are happening. And you might notice that a lot of thoughts are happening before a thing happens. Like, I'm hungry. I want to make breakfast. what do I want for breakfast? I want pancakes today. You might not be having this whole dialogue, but you're just moving through the kitchen, grabbing what you want, making what you need, and then delighting in the experience of eating pancakes. But it all started with a thought or something that you imagined, and then you created it. If you're working on a project like building a house, for example, before you even draw the blueprint, you're thinking about and imagining the kind of house that you want to live in. And then all the details that come after that, they all sprang up from this source of imagination. And the same goes for even creating a relationship. You're thinking about, even on a subconscious level, because a lot of times it's not conscious and we're not really going through the steps of planning out everything that we want to experience in a relationship, but we are very quickly processing desires and hopes and dreams and things that we imagine would feel good in relationship as we are making choices to actualize the experience of that relationship. So all this is to say that everything we do or create in reality is springing out of imagination, and everything that we can experience or create in non-physical reality is also going to benefit from the use of our imaginations as we steer ourselves out of the physical focus and into the non-physical. So athletes use this, of course, visualizing winning a race or being able to do the next dance move. You know, it all starts with imagination, and then the body follows or the mind follows or whatever else has to happen. It comes from that first initial thought power. So thinking about the imagination and the Akashic records and this workshop that I took recently, you know, I've noticed how it can seem really cheesy sometimes in spiritual communities when people start to say things like, oh, you can just play in the Akashic records, you can do whatever you want, you can learn anything and get anything. And it kind of annoyed me because it's not my personality to always be that playful. But over the years, I've learned that it's actually a great benefit to not take things so seriously and be a little silly with it. Let the imagination run wild. You can always bring it back into the present moment, focus on what needs to happen in the day ahead or in the moment of your life and what you need to do to keep moving forward. But give yourself those times to just run wild with your imagination, and don't be afraid of looking stupid or silly or seeming cheesy, because actually this is going to benefit you a lot when it comes to accessing the data from the database. So people like to talk about the Akashic records as this place where they can go and find information. But what kind of information can you get? So you can actually get, according to history and to these ancient yogis and to scientists like Tom Campbell and to remote viewers, you can access any kind of data. So Tom Campbell breaks it down into probable databases. He has the past, present, and future databases as in his theory. Remote viewers are accessing targets, and the targets can be anything from a location in present reality to a situation in the past or future, to things that we don't even know if they are real or not, like, for example, aliens. And remote viewers are often accessing targets using the protocol of having basically an assistant who holds the target for them and gives them something like a series of numbers. And then that number represents the target, and they don't have any information about the target, and they start to open their mind to impressions of what the truth of that target is, and then they sketch or write out those impressions in a very systematic way in order to gather key pieces of information. Usually those key pieces of information are then interpreted by an interpreter. So if you had like 3 remote viewers remote viewing a target and you gathered all of their data and you saw a common pattern in that data, you would have a pretty strong and clear assessment of what the target is, and then that's what they would present to the person who actually knows what the target is, because it's double blind, and so the person holding the number doesn't even know what the target is. And then they look at it and they say, yes, that's exactly, it was Mount Kilimanjaro, and this person saw the shape of it, this person saw the color of it, that person saw the temperature, and they felt and smelled the air, and we put it all together, and all of this data corresponds with the truth of this target. And as they began to study and practice this protocol, they realized that they could access data from, the past, present, and future, internal and external data, physical and non-physical data. And so it all points back to the Akashic records, or this idea of this all pervasive truth that is just the fundamental data of our reality. And I like the idea of thinking of it as like a fluid or a liquid or some kind of ethereal thing that permeates, because liquid is a nice example of something that takes the impressions of things around it and sort of incorporates that into the essence of what it is. Like water crystals can actually create images that mimic or describe things that it is in contact with. And there have been studies done around this. And so it's a nice way of thinking of this non-physical medium that exists. But the digital version of this metaphor is also very useful. The database, an ongoing database of information that exists at the most simple level, in the most simple form, that if you think of it as ones and zeros, if you have the ability to interpret the meaning of those ones and zeros, then you can take that data and render information. So all of us potentially have this ability, according to all of these experts. And I think it's exciting that each one of us has the potential to interpret the data in our own special and unique way. Just like remote viewers refer to themselves as remote sensors, because some remote viewers see visuals, others feel feelings, others smell smells, and some people have a full-on, completely immersive experience of being in that reality, and they can see and hear and feel and touch everything that the target has to offer. And those are like the true experts of remote viewing. Those are the kinds of people who seem to be able to do things that are more along the lines of astral travel or out of body, where they could actually, for example, access a underground base, and they could take their astral form or their consciousness form, and they could move around in that space, in the information of that space, and they could see everything in the room. They could see the shelves. They could go and open a drawer. They could pull out a piece of paper and read what was written on it, all from a meditation state, from a room far, far away from the actual target location, and they are able to bring back real information. So as people are experiencing and studying these things, we often get tied up in trying to make sense of exactly what is going on from a materialist perspective. And you hear a lot of this conversation happening in the telepathy tapes when they're trying to figure out, is a thought being passed? Is it a word? How are they hearing the thought? How are they seeing it? And the more they dig, the less they understand in a way, but also the more they understand, because what they're starting to realize is that there isn't just one simple and straightforward way that this data is being transmitted. And each of the individuals has their own special and unique way of accessing the information, interpreting it, and sharing it. And that they're not limited to just things like thought transference. They can do a whole lot more than that. And some of the other things that they mention in the podcast is like similar to what medical intuitives do, like people who can see a disease in someone or pick up on the information that there's the energy of a disease present. And this is something that Carolyn Miss talks about a lot as well, and she's a medical intuitive. And she found in her research and studies that she could she's a healer as well, so she could perceive the data of a disease before it was really fully formed and physical. So before a doctor could test for it, she could sense that it was kind of coming, or that the precursors were there. And then, unfortunately, a doctor would do the tests later and they would find that, oh, that disease really was there. And so once she realized that, she learned that she could also use her intent to modify the probability of that disease actually manifesting. And that's what a healing power is, essentially. It is a person who has a pure enough and clear enough intent that they can modify a future probability. So, for example, if someone already has a disease and they go to a really powerful healer, and that healer does whatever their protocol is, and maybe they open to divine power and let that channel through them, because getting their own ego out of the way is the best way for them to access a greater power than themselves. And then that intent is so powerful and so true that it has an impact on the system, and the system, the probabilities start to shift. And so in that random draw, where reality is about to render the next thing and say, this is now happening here in physical matter reality, the probabilities have shifted and the disease likelihood has gone down. And so the probability of health has gone up, and there's more of a chance of the system drawing that. And so I think this is where we get into like our true power in all of this. It's really our intent and our ability to modify future probabilities. But if we all want to access things like our telepathic nature, which according to all these experts who are talking now is innate in all humans and a potential that exists within all of us, we might want to take a page from Houston's book and consider that being truthful is one way to increase the power of our thoughts and therefore our ability to receive data as well. Another thing that Houston said in that episode, and that his mother mentioned, is that it's like a radio receiver, and interference can really make it hard to receive the data. And the interference in his situation is hateful and negative thoughts. So when he goes out into a big crowd of people, for example, he's hearing all the thoughts, and they're very loud and distracting, and it's harder to understand what's coming from where. If his anxiety levels are high, he's really consumed by his own anxiety and unable to interpret the data that is flowing to him. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to think about, because we all live in this world that we are co-creating with our choices and our actions and our intents and our thoughts. And so when the signal of anxiety and fear and hatred and jealousy and greed and all the other negative emotions are really high, maybe that's one of the main reasons why a lot of us are having a hard time clearing our minds and getting more data from the database. And the data, it's not about like finding out the answers to secrets and things like that. I think it's probably a much better use of our talents to tap into the data that is going to have a positive benefit on our lives as individuals and as a collective. And so that's where we're going to get into a little Akashic record practice using our imaginations and a couple of different techniques. So let's get out our journals and think about, I'm just going to kind of lead us through like a little visualization that will bring us into that place of possibility. So right now, we are consciousness existing in the field of consciousness. And we're going to use our imaginations to locate this aspect of reality called the Akashic record. So we've just gone over the concept of what it is. The database of all that has been, all that currently is, and all that will be in its purest form. And we're going to think of it like an ocean. Our individual minds are drops in that ocean, And right now, we are letting go of the boundary of our little drop, and we're merging consciousness with the entire ocean of all that is. And it's just this vast, ethereal liquid of truth. And we are letting go of all of our fears, of all of our masks, of all of our stress and tension and anxiety, so that we are vibrating at the frequency of that essential truth. So we're now one with that ocean of information. And each of us is a free will point of consciousness now. We've let go of the drop. We are just pure consciousness. And now we want to navigate this ocean. We want to direct our awareness to a question. So you can either write down or simply hold the question in your mind. Just whatever question first pops into your mind. Don't overthink it. You can ask infinite questions when this meditation is done. You can do this as many times as you want. So right now I'm going to write down my question. And just read or repeat your question to yourself one more time to check that it is clear and direct, and it will direct you to the most specific and useful and practical information, or simply the answer to the question, depending on the nature of your question. So I'm going to reread mine to myself. And now we're going to hold the question for a moment. We're in this ocean of information still. We're holding the question. And now we're going to start receiving and expressing back to ourselves the answers, the impressions, the feelings. You might hear an answer. You might hear pure silence. If you're in silence, what is the feeling? You might see images in your mind's eye. You can jot them down or sketch a little picture. Don't try to interpret it now, just simply let the impressions flow to you. And if you're feeling like there's no answer, I'm not hearing or seeing anything, consider this the concept of a download. And this is where we are going to bring the imagination back in and visualize that the Akashic record has instilled within you a download. It is the answer to your question, and it is slowly unfurling within you over the course of the day or the week or the month. And just like a very quiet truth It is resonating in every cell of your being. You know the answer. The answer is in you. And as you are ready, you will access, you will open this download, and you will read it, or you will understand it as time goes on. So if you're not the kind of person who gets an immediate rendered answer, trust that the answer is still there and it can flow through you in unexpected ways, and it can open up in your conscious mind overnight as you sleep. It can come to you the next morning. It can show up in a message that you see on your phone, or in a movie, or in a song that you hear on the radio. And when you get the answer, you'll know, you'll understand, and you will feel a little bell go off inside of your consciousness that says, oh, there it is. That was the answer. This kind of visualization, applying the imagination in this way, helps to remove any mental blocks that your conscious mind wants to throw up in fear or anxiety of this great power. And now we are going to bring our awareness back into our selves, into our bodies. We are back into our single drops. The ocean is still everywhere and we are still a part of it, but we are now bringing our awareness and our focus back into this current little iteration of who we are in these lives. And we are starting to recalibrate to this current form, grounding back into our physical bodies, our mental realities, our energetic realities as individuals in this moment and in this day. And that's how you close the records. So, obviously, just like any psi skill or any artistic skill or musical skill or life skill, these things take practice to be great at. And there will always be some people who naturally have an easy ability with these things, and others who require more effort over time to be able to access their non-physical abilities. So it's very personal. And each of us will have our own intimate relationship to our ability to access data, intuition, answers. Some people can see the answer to a mathematical equation in numbers in their mind. Other people are really good at having an intuition that helps them through the day. And one way to grow and to enhance your ability is to start noticing every time that you are accessing data non-locally or non-physically. So I'll give you a little silly example. I went to dinner at a friend's house last night, and I bought a bottle of sake that I wanted to bring to the dinner, and I put it in the fridge. And when I stuck it in the fridge, I knew, okay, this is like a place where you might end up forgetting this bottle. But I wanted it to stay cold. So I put it in there. I told myself I'll remember this later. And then when it came time to go, I hopped in the car and I was about to start the car, and all of a sudden this little feeling came back. Oh, you forgot your bottle of sake. And I ran back in the house and got it. Now, what was that little feeling, and why did it come at the exact right moment? This is the kind of thing that some people interpret as like, my guides helped me, or my angels helped me, or the universe reminded me. And I like to think of my body's intelligence as one of my primary allies in reality. And I think my body reminded me. I think my body has its own innate intelligence and cellular memory and awareness of everything. And in that moment, my body knew that this was something that I had said that I wanted to remember. My thoughts had said, I want to remember this, even though I was putting it away in a place where I wasn't going to see it. And then my body just kind of pulsed with this reminder message. It was just this very subtle thing. And I don't hear a voice saying, oh, go get that bottle. Don't forget you left that bottle in the fridge. It's just this instantaneous, totally silent knowing. I think that's a really good indication of intuition. When you just have this instantaneous, completely wordless and thoughtless, deep inner knowing that guides you in a moment. It bubbles up from the depths of your being, and then your conscious mind grabs a hold of it and says, "Oop, you're right. I got to go grab that bottle. Thank you." I think saying thank you every time something like that happens is also another really great way to reinforce that ability and habit and to grow it. And I will tell you one other little secret of mine, which is really silly, but has proven to work. And I think I heard this on a YouTube video a really long time ago. But it's like having a little statement that you use and that you repeat over and over again can gain a lot of power. Like it can build up in power over time. And I used to like lose things, like forget where my keys were, or I'm looking for a certain pen or pencil or whatever it is in the house. You've all been there. And I learned this little phrase, like super conscious, like talk to the super conscious mind and always ask the super conscious mind when you need to find something. And so my nickname being Shock or Shocks, I like to say super conscious shock, locate pen, or like super conscious shock, locate blah, 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 whatever the thing is. And if I'm like digging around in a junk drawer with all kinds of stuff and I'm like sifting through trying to find that thing, the second I say like super conscious shock, find the tape measure, it's like my hand just goes right to it and picks it up. I swear to you, it is so cool. And it's because I've been doing it for years. So you could do anything. You could have your own little phrase. It could be like, you could say, brilliant body, tell me what I'm forgetting right now. Or you could say, angels, helpers, and guides. What do I need to do next? Where do I need to go today for groceries? Like, it's often little things. It'll steer you towards like, go this way or that way because there's a car accident down the road this other way, you know, and you don't know that that car accident is there unless you decide to override the guidance, and then you go the wrong way and you're like, that's what they were talking about. But the they isn't necessarily someone other than yourself. It's just a metaphor that people like to use, like my helpers, my guides, my this, my that. Maybe it is and maybe it's not, but it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the quality of the exchange and the information and what you do with it. And so for me, I just love to pay attention to the times when stuff like that is happening, because I think that's the best way to tune into that layer of reality and to become more aware of it. And the more aware you are, the more you experience it, just like anything else in life. One of my practices is tracking things. And I find that as soon as I start tracking things, like in a journal or a planner, and just tracking over time, like how many times does this happen or that happen? Or my friends know all about this. I have my little special secret things that I like to track with myself. But one of the things that I can talk about is like tracking whether or not I had a good or a bad day at work. And just by like tuning my awareness to that and starting to notice it, it quickly changes how I experience reality, and I can start to make things better. It's like I can start to incorporate my free will into my experience of life in a positive and beneficial way. And I think that's where the most power lies for all of us, is in our ability to affect change in our own experiences, because it's easy to feel like a victim of life and like things are happening to us, but the truth is we have a ton of power. And I think all of these psi abilities, all of these ancient teachings, and the modern excitement around telepathy and UAP and aliens and UFOs and all of it, what it can really teach us is how to have a better life and to create a better world for everybody. So on that note, I wanted to wrap it up with some alien talk like I said I would, and I linked a video below from this new podcast, Cosmosis, that Kelly Chase and J. Christopher King are hosting. Kelly Chase did the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast. That was really good. And now on the same channel, they're making this podcast called Cosmosis, and it's great. The conversations are really fun. Whitley Strieber is a guest on one of these recent episodes, and he is a famous alien abduction experiencer and author and host of Dreamland, and his website is called unknowncountry.com. All the links are below. And he has a new book out called The Fourth Kind, which I haven't read yet, but he's talking in it about the nature of these NHI, non-human intelligences, or aliens, and the Greys are the kind of aliens that he has the most contact with. And he talks about this idea of using meditation to make contact, which is also what Jacob Barber talks about with psionics. And J. Christopher King asks him, when you're in a meditation, do you think of the NHI as a guide or a higher self, or do you see them as the Greys, and do you think there is any reason to delineate between the different taxonomies? And basically this question has to do with the fact that, like, because we don't have any full-on physical evidence that is available to everyone regarding these alien beings, many people often wonder if these are similar to other non-physical entities like angels, demons, fairies, and all the things that have existed throughout time, and that we just call them aliens or whatever. But Whitley Strieber thinks that, like, the Greys are a very specific being and that they are physical, and he's had experiences with them, so that's his take on it. And he says that, and I thought this was just very interesting, that the Greys are not interested in being guides. He says they would actually hate that, and they have a whole different way that they're trying to interact with human consciousness. So they want participation and friendship, and deeper than friendship, they want to be in our experience. You have to let their consciousness into yours and share. And this is a quote that he says, like any addict, they will take everything if they can. They lost everything of value when they lost the present. There is no novelty in the moment, and it's appalling. It's like a nightmare. So that sounds a little bit intense, but he also has a positive relationship with them. But what he's saying is, like, you have to have your own boundaries. You have to assert your own free will with them. You can't just give them everything and let them fully possess you and take over your experience, because in his theory of his own theory that he's come to based on his experience with these beings is that they are existing somewhat outside of time. And the way I interpret that is actually that they are a type of consciousness that has evolved to a level where it is normal for them to process data from the data stream simultaneously. Like, they are perceiving past, present, and future databases simultaneously. So they're constantly aware of all of the probabilities in every direction from that present moment of existence, which is like where every consciousness unit is focused. And whereas humans, we are not perceiving things in that same way. So for these gray beings, according to Whitley Strieber, they want to merge consciousness with humans because it's this beautiful, deep experience for them. It's a moment, or it's a way for them to be with us in our experience of the present moment and the novelty of, like, things occurring in this time-bound reality. It's a very interesting theory. I don't know if I completely buy into it, but I will consider it, and I do think there might be some truth here. I just think that it's the kind of thing where everyone has their own interpretation, and I think that those interpretations are colored by our own experiences and biases and things like that. And over time, they often shift and change. And so I think it's good for us to kind of keep an open mind and loosely consider these possibilities, but allow new information to come in and shift the way that we interpret these perceptions of reality and non-human intelligences. So I just thought that was really interesting. And I'm still reading Abduction by John Mack, and all of the experiencers talk about these telepathic communications with aliens. So whether or not these beings are physical beings in our reality coming from other places to us, or whether they are perhaps non-physical intelligences existing on other planes of existence and kind of entering into our physical reality through consciousness. I think that either way, what really matters is the quality of the exchange of information that's happening. So some people are having really positive experiences, other people are having negative experiences, and then everyone is trying to make sense of that and to create a narrative that helps to understand what the alien agenda might be. But I think the truth is, we're nowhere near understanding what any agenda might be, because we're still at the very beginning of just starting to wrap our own consciousness around what it means to communicate beyond the physical. Once we are all more practiced at this ability, I think all of us combining our intelligences will be able to better interpret what's really going on, what these beings are, who they are, where they really come from, quote unquote. And we will be experts at discerning the information that is flowing to us. And then eventually, I think we'll have a better chance of being able to pinpoint the source of that information. But it's just not as straightforward as face-to-face physical communications that we are used to. So I do think for all of us who are very curious about these great mysteries, it's of the utmost importance that we use our imaginations to explore different possibilities, that we continue to bring ourselves back into our own, basically staying in our own lane, like what is my business of this life? Because that's number one, what I need to be focused on. And then as time goes on, using practices and protocols to expand our awareness in order to have greater experiences in reality. I think these are the things that excite me about life, and I think these are all things that are possible for all of us if it's stuff that we're interested in. So thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for doing the little Akashic meditation with me, and I hope you enjoyed it. And try it again sometime too, you know, like you could try automatic writing. You could try using your voice recording app on your phone to channel an answer to yourself, if that's what you prefer, is a verbal way of letting the data flow through you. And just have fun with it and see what comes. And then record the result of these experiences over time. Like maybe have a synchronicity diary and notice, like, if you experienced like 20 synchronicities in a week, how many of them were meaningful? How many of them were useful? Or how many of them were just totally nonsensical? And what does that mean to you? And make up your own definition and your own methods for these things, because none of us should feel confined by what has come before. These are all just sources of inspiration for us to build upon and to develop our own techniques and to continue to expand our awareness as individuals and as a collective. So thanks again for hanging out, and I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.